Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 30th of July. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. Weather.gov/Alaska is an easily online source for that information 24 hours a day, but you can also use our Alaska Weather Information line, 1-800-472-0391. You can email me, got questions, concerns about the show, about what you're finding from the National Weather Service in Alaska. I'm privileged to serve you any way I possibly can. Please let me know, and make sure you are subscribed and follow, and all that wonderful stuff on social media. Our Facebook pages, U.S. National Weather Service, Fairbanks, Juneau, Anchorage, and Alaska to get more of a statewide and comprehensive view. A lot of that information is on Twitter as well. Use the hashtag #AKwx and tune in to all that Alaska weather information anytime. Taking a look at fire danger around the region, updated this afternoon, you'll notice that the areas of concern are shrinking quickly. It looks like we're moving toward the end of summer. Don't tell anybody. I don't want to talk about it too loud, but conditions have been wetter for sure across west and especially northwestern Alaska. We still have some lingering fire concerns here across parts of the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, the northern end of the Seward Peninsula, and certainly into the middle Yukon Valley and the Yukon Flats. That's still pretty dry stuff up there. Around the Susitna Valley, still some high fire danger concerns there, but the Kenai Peninsula has really quieted down. Driving down there for some fish just last week, the fire danger signs very near the Swan Lake fire and in the Soldotna area are pointed at low in the green area. Smokey the Bear is happy right now, and again, a big thanks to all of our firefighting crews out there. As conditions continue to track on through the end of the season, we certainly appreciate your hard work there, and for everyone else, we appreciate your thoughtful concern for wildfire safety as you go about your day and your business. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and you can see how that sun angle is changing again as we kind of head toward the end of the summer there. Low pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf, dragging in a lot of dry air off of the continent here. This drier air mass is still in control of the Gulf. High pressure sitting right here. It's not going to budge for the next couple days. So what you see across the Gulf, pretty much what you're going to get. Across the central and southern parts of southeast, a better chance for some showers, maybe even a thunderstorm tomorrow. But our really active weather is going to sweep across the northwestern parts of Alaska here. As this next weather front moves from west to east across the Beaufort, we're going to see the wind start to come up, starting on Wednesday, kind of creeping up a little bit more. And by Thursday, this area here is probably going to be a lot windier than what you've seen for the last several days. And then it should start to subside as we get into Friday. So Thursday is going to be the big day to watch here. Watch for that at the end of the show when we get into our marine maps. I think you'll see some interesting stuff. Out across the west, several weather disturbances are working across the Aleutian chain. None of them terribly significant, but each one of them has the opportunity to crank up some showers, a little more wind. And on the north and western side of that, certainly some fog. We're seeing that out around Shemya and Attu this afternoon. So low pressure right now sitting across the Gulf. You can see high pressure where it's probably going to build in right here. You'll probably see that in the next couple maps. Showers across southeast this afternoon. Still looking at smoke. Tanana was reporting smoke earlier this afternoon. Thunderstorms popping up across the Alcan border, mainly over on the Yukon side. And then we have our weather front working across the Pribilofs and also across the eastern chain with a weak area of low pressure around the Kenai and a stronger area of low pressure a little bit further to the north and west coming into the Chukchi. As we get into tonight, again, that high pressure ridge is starting to build in here across the Gulf. Low pressure is working its way into south and western Alaska, probably out ahead of that, areas of light rain and some drizzle. A front works into the Chukchi coast. With that, a little bit more of a southwesterly flow into the interior. That's going to keep the smoke fairly widespread across the Tanana Valley into the upper Kuskokwim and around the Alcan border. Showers out ahead of that. And up north, cooler areas of light rain and fog for parts of the Chukchi coast with low pressure at 998 millibars. To the west, another surge of some warmer air working its way across the western chain and residual areas of low pressure just kind of hanging out across the eastern Gulf. Really not a lot, but still enough to stir up some showers across mainly southern parts of the Panhandle. And there's our high pressure ridge as we get into Wednesday. 1,021 millibars there. This continues to grow. Low pressure is working its way into the Bristol Bay region by Wednesday afternoon. Our first front that made its way ashore into the interior from the north and west is starting to break up a little bit. There's still some evidence of some changes in the air mass there, the separations of temperature, wind direction, and humidity all working its way across the north slope, but it does look like you're going to see a pretty widespread area of shower activity across the west and northwest, and really as far south as the Yukon Delta. That might be a little bit of a steadier rainfall. Out across the west, we see that warmer air is advancing very, very slowly across the western Bering. High pressure is also building in here, so anything that's developing in the west is going to have to go up and over that and take its sweet time. Out across the Alcan border, areas of smoke for the eastern interior. That could include some parts of Fairbanks all the way up toward Northway and Eagle and down toward McCarthy. And a few showers and again a thunderstorm possible across some parts of the central and southern sections of southeast. Now as we get into Thursday, this is the wind day. Notice that those isobars, those lines of constant pressure, we usually talk about this a lot more in the wintertime, right? This is familiar territory for many of you. But notice how those are kind of crushing together a little bit more. That's going to allow that wind to really zip right across the north slope. And specifically for the Beaufort Seacoast, we think the winds are going to come up and drive that surf to about maybe 8 to 10 feet with breaking waves offshore, but enough surf that you might have some minor coastal erosion. So if you're on the Beaufort Seacoast, now's a really good time ahead of that to get your stuff off of the beach and off of the coast. Pull it back a little bit and be better prepared for what's coming in on Thursday. It doesn't look terribly severe, but it looks like something that you're probably not used to seeing so far this season. Might want to pull the stuff off the beach there, and then after Friday, things should start to improve. Now, across the Bering Sea at 994 millibar low, a little bit of a stronger area of low pressure in the north compared to what you see in the south is driving another front across the Aleutians. A little bit of a heftier southwesterly flow will work across the central Bering Sea. Some rain and drizzle across the Pribilofs, as you would expect, and a better chance of showers and thunderstorms across the Alaska Range. But more notably, the Talkeetnas will probably see a better chance for some thunder and lightning there. Most other areas south, west, and east of that will not experience that. And showers, again, still across central and southern parts of southeast. Here's a look at your temperatures as we get into Wednesday morning. 50s for most of southeast as you wake up there. Lower to mid-50s across south central all the way up toward Talkeetna. Looks like about 53 around Fairbanks, mid-50s for Fort Yukon, upper 40s and lower 50s for the North Slope, so still very mild there. Nome looking at 50 degrees, Bethel about 51, Bristol Bay, Dillingham, King Salmon, all looking at lower 50s there, 54 around Sandpoint, and just shy of 50 degrees around St. Paul and St. George. Afternoon temperatures soar once again into the upper 60s and lower 70s for the interior. The North Slope back in the mid-40s for areas around Wainwright, but still very mild from Utqiagvik eastward toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. Kaktovik a little cooler at 42, lower 60s for southeast, and most areas in the Akpen toward Kodiak still holding in the lower to mid 60s. Overnight lows Thursday morning back in the mid 40s for the North Slope, the upper parts of the Yukon. Mid 40s there down towards southwest, really not a big change. South central closer to 50 degrees in many areas. Cordova about 49 degrees. Kodiak 54 and Adak and Atka upper 40s and lower 50s with high temperatures there back in the mid 50s by the afternoon Thursday. Upper 60s and maybe a few lower 70s as you creep eastward there. Most areas cooling down though with more clouds and showers. Mid 60s south central and low to mid 60s for southeast. 46 in Wainwright. Let's take a look a little bit further out toward August 13th, the period for 8 to 14 days ahead of this. Things are going to be warmer than average. That's what the climate outlook shows right now. So above normal temperatures should be expected with above normal precipitation in the north and western sides and drier than normal weather across south central and southeast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation weather now. IFR conditions are expected to be fairly widespread across the Gulf and southern parts of southeast tomorrow. As we get into the afternoon, some of this could grow into a convective area where the showers, maybe even a few storms could be possible. Looks like the IFR will stay fairly steady and heavy across Kodiak Island, most of the Alaska Peninsula and the chain up through the Pribilofs and up the west coast, but just kind of grazing the outer coastal areas of the YK Delta. Most areas inland will be at least VFR, if not just brushing with MVFR conditions. Some of the MVFR will be a little bit further inland into the central Brooks Range with IFR up the Chukchi Coast, into Kotzebue Sound and across the Arctic coast with MVFR more likely across the Beaufort. As we get into Wednesday afternoon, you won't see a whole lot of change, certainly not for the interior. Most areas there, and including most of your favorite passes, will be VFR. Here's our chance of convection here as we get into the afternoon, so watch for clouds to bubble up there, especially across the central and northern parts of southeast. Marginal conditions will improve across parts of southern southeast from what was formerly IFR. IFR will be fairly widespread across the Gulf and again in same old places across the west and the west coast, though you will notice a little bit more of the IFR creeping into the YK Delta and also stretching up the Koyukuk Valley and into parts of Norton Sound where it wasn't present earlier in the morning. IFR is also expected through the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Coast for your Wednesday afternoon. For Thursday, watch for IFR to push back into the outer coast of southeast and southern parts of southeast with marginal conditions across the inner passage. Watch for the middle and upper Yukon valleys to start to look at MVFR conditions throughout the day. AKwx and Adigan Pass lean over to IFR in the afternoon or in the morning hours for Thursday, with the Chukchi Coast and parts of the western Beaufort Seacoast looking at IFR, as well as a large chunk of the Bering Sea and the west coast, including the Yukon Delta into outer sections of the Seward Peninsula. Some of that will peel back on Thursday afternoon. We'll watch for shower and thunderstorm activity to be limited around the Talkeetnas. Generally south of that, it should be generally more stable. Marginal conditions around parts of the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and into southeast, with IFR pulling back for most of the southeastern coastline, with the exception of areas around Yakutat and Icy Cape. St. Paul and St. George out with the central and western Aleutians, still looking at IFR, and south of Akiak into just about Sandpoint. Also expecting to see IFR for Thursday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions now for Wednesday. We'll start with marginal levels on AKwx and Adigan Pass, leaning over to VFR as the day goes on there for your Wednesday. Things should improve. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass all the way up toward Rainy Pass and onto Windy Pass, mostly VFR, but Windy Pass probably will start at marginal levels and then improve as the day goes on. Isabel Pass, we expect to see VFR. Mentasta Pass, also expected to be visual flight rule throughout the day. Tanita Pass, again, marginal conditions throughout the day with VFR developing by the afternoon. Portage Pass, marginal. This is mainly due to slop holding around the Prince William Sound side. And Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to start at marginal levels with improvement noted throughout the day. Your freezing levels show a kind of a tight gradient here around the Chukchi Coast. Levels as low as 2,000 feet way across eastern Russia, well west of the Gulf of Anadyr, but you can see those levels climbing quickly to 6, even 8,000 feet as they approach the Seward Peninsula coastline around Shishmaref. 10,000 feet around Gamble and Savunga, all the way into southwestern Alaska, and we've got an 8,000 foot level just across southern parts of southeast. A little bit cooler air here into the Pacific Northwest, and generally uniform temperatures there for most of the mainland, anywhere from 8 to about 10,000 feet, and levels from about 12 to 14 for the central and western chain. So no major cold weather issues there across the great state. Now, as we look up to the northwest, icing potential lingers above 10,000 feet and also across southwest, so no significant concerns for general aviation. Higher flyers might want to take note of that, but right now it looks to be isolated moderate at best. We do have that area of convection across the central and northern parts of southeast. Of course, that could imply isolated but severe icing potential. The jet stream has low pressure sitting across southern southeast, and that's pulling in a little bit of a faster little jetlet moving out of the western Yukon and eastern sections of the interior. That's running around 50 knots or so. The main quarter, the Pacific air, is generally moving around 50 to 65 knots. Pretty wavy stuff there. We've got several waves of low pressure working their way across. The Arctic jet coming in across the Kamchatka Peninsula about 50 to 55 knots, also generally slow, but it is working its way into the Norton Sound area. At 9,000 feet, a more smoother trough showing up here across the west coast. Wind speeds there anywhere from 15 to about 30 knots. Low pressure south of the Alaska Peninsula and also across the Pacific Northwest, giving most of the mainland a southwesterly flow and light northerlies coming into southeast. And you can see a similar pattern at 3,000 feet. Light winds for southeast, southerlies light coming inland across Cook Inlet and the Kenai, and more of a stronger west and southwesterly flow for the interior and northwestern parts of the state. Turbulence-wise, there will be some chop below 4,000 feet for the Koyukuk Valley in western Yukon and the northwest.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected. And the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and they'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And onto your sea ice update now. Yeah, you can see it looks a lot more like September as we are nearing the end of July. So well ahead of schedule there. A lot of open water all the way through the Beaufort and the Chukchi Sea. There is possibly some marginal ice lingering just north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. However, the Alaska Sea Ice Program folks tell me that there has not been a lot of good satellite views of the central Beaufort Seacoast in the last day or so. So chances are with the warm water that is detected in there that a lot of this is probably not there. It's drawn in there for safekeeping. In the meantime, you can see the pack ice as well to the north, to the east, and well off to the west. And again, just an expansive area of open water. Easy to say, somewhat unusual for this time of the year. You can always check the very latest analysis, sea surface temperatures, and more at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Here's a look at the forecast in southeast for Wednesday. Light winds across southeast. In the inside passage, 5-knot winds from the west in Clarence Strait, 2-foot seas. There may be south winds coming up through the Stevens Passage and into the Lynn Canal area, 10 to 15 knots, 3 to 4-foot seas. And north and westerlies light coming down the outer coast, 10 to 15, looking at 3 to 4-foot seas there. As we get into Thursday, very little change. Winds holding around 10 to 15 knots in all areas. More of a southerly flow coming up the inside passage, more of a north and westerly flow coming down the outside coast there, looking at about 3 to 4-foot seas tops. Generally speaking, pretty nice weather for southeast as we go into the end of July. For Prince William Sound, light winds, small seas for you. A south and westerly flow coming up the north and western Gulf, 15 knots to 20 knots perhaps around the Barrens. 4 to 5-foot seas there. Southerlies coming up Cook Inlet, 15 to 20, and 4 to 5-foot seas on the inside as well. And for Thursday, 15 to 20 knot winds across Cook Inlet. Some of the higher winds and seas will be around areas just south of Kenai, down at Clam Gulch and Resurrection Bay. For most areas around the Gulf of Alaska, very light winds and small seas, 2 to 3 feet. Can't be beat. Looks like a great Thursday. As you look around the Alaska Peninsula into Bristol Bay, a south and easterly flow, 20 knots, 4 to 5-foot seas tops there, looking at about 6-foot seas from Kodiak Island all the way down the Pacific coast. 5-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait with a southwesterly flow at 20. That diminishes as we get into Thursday. Easterlies coming across Bristol Bay and Shelikof Strait. A east and northeasterly flow bending around low pressure here in the western Gulf. About 15 to 20, looking at seas 5 to 6 feet there around the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday. For the Aleutians, a westerly flow for most of the chain, 15 to 20. About 7 to 8-foot seas there on the Pacific side, 4 to 5-foot seas on the Bering Sea side. And you'll notice the winds curving back in toward Attu, anywhere from 5 to 7-foot seas there. 15 to 25-knot winds. So look for that to come up as low pressure and a front are working through. And you'll see that really coming up there as you get into Thursday. So much stronger southerly flow, 11 to 12 foot seas on that 35 knot wind, and 15 to 30 knot winds across the central and eastern chain there. Really falling off though as you fall off to the east, anywhere from 3 to 4 foot seas there around Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and out toward Nikolsky. The west coast, light winds coming in from the south and the east, 10 to 20 knots, 2 to 4 foot seas, the smallest of which will be around St. Matthew down toward the Pribilofs. A light westerly onshore flow into Norton Sound, 15 to 20 there with 4 foot seas on Wednesday. For Thursday, it diminishes ever so slightly, and southeasterlies build over St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George Islands with 3 to 6 foot seas there on that 15 to 25 knot wind. For the Arctic coast now, I want you to pay special attention to the Beaufort seacoast. Watch as we have westerly onshore flow into the Chukchi coast, 15 knots there. Stronger as you head into Kotzebue Sound, 25 knots with a 5 foot sea. And southerlies already going strong, blowing offshore, 4 to 5 foot seas across the Beaufort. That's Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, stronger westerly winds are expected. We're going to see high surf in the region. Most of those waves will be breaking offshore, 8 to 10 foot seas there. Possible in some areas, and some of that could cause some minor coastal erosion in the Beaufort Seacoast areas. So now's a good time again to pull your stuff off the beach and bring it up a little bit more, get it away from some of that high wave action that could be coming in. You'll also be looking at some stronger westerly flow coming into the Chukchi Sea, 30 knots with a 9 foot sea, 8 foot seas coming down to Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, and toward Kivalina into Kotzebue Sound. Westerlies 20 knots with 6 foot seas on Thursday, so be prepared. As a cold front sweeps across the North Slope tonight, it sets up that area of low pressure around the Chukchi Sea that will spread areas of light rain, fog, and drizzle into the region. We still have smoke in the interior, low pressure across the southwest coast, and light areas of shower activity across the central and southern parts of southeast, maybe even a thunderstorm around central and southern parts of southeast tomorrow. High pressure is going to stay in charge of the Gulf as we go into the weekend here and toward the end of the week. Low pressure is working its way across the North Slope, and that low pressure system across the Chukchi is going to stir up the winds as we head into Thursday again. So again, for the Chukchi coast and especially into the Beaufort, pay special attention to the information coming out of the Weather Service forecast folks in Fairbanks. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.